Hi, guys. Welcome to the Tony Wong Podcast, Episode 2, Being Physically, Mentally, and Emotionally Fit in Technology. And our guest today is Steve Mescon. Steve is a former game industry professional, having spent over 10 years at Riot Games, helping shape the way the company thought about managing its relationship with customers and players. And most recently, he was the general manager for North American publishing at Riot Games. Throughout his career and life, he's had a fixation on personal transformation and experimentation, including losing over 200 pounds, 230 to be exact. And he did this without medical procedures of any kind. He did it the old-fashioned way through diet, exercise, and a whole lot of discipline. He's deeply interested in optimizing both the experience of being an individual living his life to the fullest, while also working toward improving the experience of the collective well-being of humanity. He experiments with, invests in, and supports a wide range of performance-enhancing products and companies. Everything from performance-enhancing wearables like Cyton Labs' medical-grade cold laser system that effectively enhances the neuron's energy performance at a cellular level. He uses this on muscular and connective tissue injuries as well as his brain, to also psychedelics to make him, as he says, a more well-rounded person, to his efforts in social and political reform. My often co-host Ron Williams and I are excited to dive into these topics and more with Steve Mescon today. Please help us in welcoming him to the podcast. So the backdrop to this conversation is an observation that while there's a point of view that people in tech are like geeky keyboard jockeys, I actually think we push the lifestyle of health and performance. In fact, I feel like there's an ethos of not only competition with your peers, but more like competition with yourself to improve yourself both mentally, physically, and emotionally, and using every means we can get our hands on to do that. So I think that's what led us into this discussion. How's that resonate with you guys?
Yeah,
I think I agree with that.
And Steve, when I asked you at first to be on this podcast, your response was, I think, indicative of this ethos I'm talking about. You said, now that we're talking about it more, I realize I need to push myself out there more. So I need to push myself to do this podcast. Do you remember when you said that?
Yeah, of course. I think, it's something that I've absolutely been thinking about for the last couple of years. For a long time when I was at Riot, I was front and center in the company when I managed the relationship with players in the early days. And I think I kind of disappeared for half a decade when I moved to do behind the scenes stuff. And, I think that there's an important skill that you develop by existing in some sort of public space. And I think that now in my life and my career, it's probably a good time for me to start thinking about how to develop those skills. And so, this is a tiptoe into the waters. And here we are.
So give us a little more insight into what those skills are, those public-facing skills.
I think it's the ability to compose yourself in a context. I think it's, the ability to entertain to some extent. I think it's the ability to craft a compelling narrative, to have something to say. I think all of those things are things that you can get better at over time. You can practice at. I think it's also just being comfortable being a visible person. I think that's actually takes time to develop. I like your dog.
Yeah. That's a good one.
The next guest.
So are you saying that those things don't naturally come to you and that you have to push yourself to do that?
I have to push myself to do anything. Naturally, the only thing that naturally comes to me is sitting on a couch and eating, everything else is hard work.
So I think that's the basis of the story we're about to get into. But I also want to bring up a day after you told me that you wanted to push yourself and put yourself out there more, you said this. You said, I've always been trying to figure out how to manipulate myself into better performance. And that for me really sums up this tech ethos of pushing the performance envelope. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, for sure. I think that people in tech are often the types of people who really enjoy problem solving. And I think when you turn this kind of orientation towards problem solving inwards, that's when you get this kind of like nature of optimization. For me, I think it's if you don't like who you are when you don't try, then try. And I think to some extent, trying means like making the subconscious conscious, and figuring out ways to change the ways that you behave. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. And both the three of us, especially Ron and I, have been in this for a long time, right? And I'm finding more and more this is a common thread of how people think and behave in tech. Do you also
like treating themselves like puzzles, or?
Yeah, to treat themselves as puzzles, but like even like when you said you have to figure out ways to manipulate yourself into better performance, the example you used was when you were really heavy, you would park your car farther and farther away from where you had to go so that you forced yourself to walk.
Yeah, of course. I don't think I invented that. I think I found it somewhere on the internet, right? But but I think, it's like one of many tools. I think at the end of the day, it's just like there is a culture of experimentation, iterative experimentation in tech. And I think you can apply that orientation towards things that you're working on professionally, but you can also do it personally. And I think that's, the approach that I took to weight loss, and the approach I take to most things where I want to go from not being good at something to being, good enough at something. And then hopefully when I'm actually good enough, I feel like I'm good enough. So that's a different problem, but.
And that day never comes, right? Yeah, that's the whole imposter syndrome.
Yeah. We get on the treadmill and you just never get off.
Yeah. Yeah.
You think it's a road race, but it's not. It's just a treadmill.
Against yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Or against the idea of what you're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, I mean, we talked about this. We've been circling around this whole diet and exercise thing. So tell us, I mean, you have a pretty extraordinary story. You were 430 pounds at some point, right?
420.
420.
Yeah, plus or minus. I guess at that point, the 10 doesn't make a difference.
And you are today what?
184 this morning.
184. That is astounding.
It's a bunch of pounds, more than half, I guess double, depending on which direction you go, right?
And you did this all without surgery or medical intervention. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's like anything else. You just, I think the analogy that I use, or I guess the metaphor that I use, it's like the idea of picking up a backpack, and and in the backpack is this understanding of where your destination is, right? And for me, it was this idea of being fit or in good shape, or a number of things that kind of came with that, and it just became this kind of like filter that every decision I made throughout my life was passed through, right? And sometimes I would make decisions to optimize for it, and sometimes I wouldn't, like a failure state. But I always carried it with me, and I made sure that I was observing whether or not I was making progress, right? This like active measurement. Unfortunately, with weight, it's pretty easy. You just like step on a scale. The course of that was really about like a series of experiments, small and large, and it wasn't like I had this like linear sense of progress where like every month I lost 3 or 4 pounds. I think it was I'd lose 30 pounds and then I'd plateau, and then I'd have to change everything like diet and exercise and and then I lose another 30 pounds and I plateau again. And, and then you do that for 6 years, and then eventually you look up and you say, oh shit, actually, like, I think I'm where I was trying to get to. So that's pretty cool. Right. But like, you just, I think the best way to do something like that is like to just get lost in the process a little bit. Cause otherwise you're going to like kill yourself emotionally, not succeeding. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What do you mean lost in the process?
Yeah. Like, your relationship, I guess the backpack, right, is, you don't always want to think about getting to the place that you're going as much as, doing the thing that you have to do to get there. Right. And I feel like if every time I thought, well, hey, if I park a little farther away, I'm going to get to where I'm going. Well, in the grand scheme of things, like, what does 100 feet matter? Right. It doesn't, but it's like the way that all those little things add up, is what gets you to where you're going. And so I think it's like that way of saying, I think that's like the nature of that sort of optimization, especially when you're talking about something like a lifestyle shift, right? It's like, it's not one big thing. It's not like just a diet or just an exercise program or just picking up a sport. It's like 5,000 small changes that you did because you just want to change the way that you operate in the world. Or I guess me, right? And I think eventually, so focused on like the iterative process, although I don't know if I was cognizant of that at the time, right? But like retrospectively, I think I was very focused on the iterative process, and just very honest with myself about where I was at, and and I think those two things eventually got me to where I am now, and I couldn't even tell you like how many thousands of different small changes I've made in my life in the last 10 years because of, this like sense of wanting to change this thing about myself. And so I don't think that the secret is like it's not like an easy thing. Like it's not one simple trick to lose, 230 pounds. It's like, 30,000 simple tricks.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, so help us simplify it for listeners. Take us through like the first step. Like, how did you stick to, the first month so that you had enough progress and habits in place so that you made it to the second month?
Yeah, I think that I wasn't going to not make it to the second month, right? So for me, I think once I pick something up and I say, I'm going to do this, then I'm just going to do it. And I think that's like a little bit of a personality trait of mine. I think I'm a little OCD. And so I have this tendency to fixate on something once I start fixating on it. So I don't even think that the idea of like stopping was often present in my mind. I think it was just like, I'm just going to keep going. And I also really didn't immerse myself in the idea that this was difficult, right? So I think obviously it must have been difficult looking at it in retrospect, but I think as I was going through it, I think a lot of these steps were more intellectualizing the experience. I parked farther away because I knew it mattered. I wasn't thinking as much about, the fact that I struggled to walk from like the back of a parking lot to the front of a grocery store when I weighed 420 pounds. I was just thinking about, this is the thing that I need to do to solve the problem, and I'm just going to walk the walk. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So does that mean like somehow you didn't experience the struggle as much as you just had this determination in your head, in your thoughts?
Yeah, because it's almost like the struggle wasn't a physical one, it was an intellectual one, right? I knew intellectually that this was the answer, and so it was the thing that I did. And then I detached myself from the physical struggle, right? I just said, yes, this is uncomfortable, but like, great. And I think, anytime you think about people who do intense physical stuff, there's always this element of physical discomfort or suffering, right? Like if you run a marathon or an Ironman or bike 100 miles, like the guys who are doing that don't get off of those and feel like, oh, I feel like $1 million right now. You got blisters and sores, and you're gonna walk funny for days. And like, I think it's the exact same thing. It's like you're just gonna push yourself to do the thing that you need to do because somewhere you decided that this mattered, and the fact that it matters to you means more than the fact that it's hard, right?
Yeah. I had my late mentor was a Navy SEAL, and I became an instructor in his martial arts, and he talked about a lot of both the determination to become a Navy SEAL as well as the I think you called it separation from the physical sensations. He actually called it an embracing of those to the point where it just didn't matter. I think he was a Navy SEAL, but the Army Rangers have a saying that goes, embrace the suck, which is this acknowledgement of, these sensations, these feelings of searing pain in my quads and the burning of my lungs are all the process of me improving myself.
Sure.
So it wasn't like this heavy burden of pain and suffering that they carried. It was more of like, this means I'm improving, and this means I'm going to become who I want to be.
This is what success feels like. Blisters on the feet, right?
Yeah.
Great. Hell yeah. Let's win.
So how did you develop that mindset when you started this journey to lose all the weight?
Probably because I don't like to fail. And so the options were to succeed or fail. And, so I think I'd rather do one than the other. So I don't know if this was this like particular mindset that I applied effort towards developing. I think that I have this like natural orientation towards really not liking to lose. So, so I just didn't, and I wasn't going to. And so it was like a stubbornness or persistence more than it was, I think, being rational about it. But I think it's like anything else where you just have to want something bad enough that you figure out how to get it. And for this I did. And I think because I know that about myself, I choose very carefully the types of things that I commit to, because I don't want to commit to something that I have a hard time letting go, or that is like where I'm likely to not succeed,
Interesting.
Which is it's a different thing I should probably work on, but yeah.
Yeah, it's all like it's different forms of kind of goal driven achievement. The way I think about that is you guys were talking through like living through the suck or working through kind of day by day. For me, it's I set a goal for whatever I'm trying to achieve, and before I start, I tend to think on it really sometimes for a very long time, and I think back. I eventually create a set of dominoes that I can actually see. And I can only do this for one or two goals at a time. Usually there's just one goal. And I tend to fixate on big goals, like not like what I want to do next week, but like what I want to accomplish in the next year at a company or in my personal life or something. There'll be some major thing I want to do. And then I'll fixate on it, like Steve says, which I think is common in tech along the way. And then I sit and I work my way backwards from the goal. And I'm like, here's all the things I have to do. And then I play scenarios through where here's all the ways it can go wrong. And then I restack my dominoes again, right? Until I get the perfect domino path lined up that then the next thing I do starts the flow of the dominoes, right? And then sometimes I mispredict or I fail, something that I thought was the right step was a bad step. And then I have to go back into myself and think through and restack all the dominoes again to get there in the mix. And then at the end of the day, I often find myself achieving my goal. What's interesting though is it got me thinking, unlike when you're doing something physical for yourself, and maybe there's actually something there to talk about too, but you get so goal driven. I've actually been counseled in my performance reviews that I'm too goal driven, like at the expense of other goals of the organization or goals of the team or, or whatever. And this probably impacts personal body stuff even too, where you can actually hurt yourself or end up at some place you didn't really want to. But and so it's a very useful skill to have, but you do have to think very carefully about everybody else around you. And as I've gotten further in my career now, I find myself not stacking dominoes so far out, and trying to, sorry for the dogs, and trying to incorporate other people's goals and maybe try to get them more on board as we go,
The dogs are the experience of living in tech, so it's okay.
Yeah.
I think I like what you're saying. I think it's important to notice that there's this like subtle distinction, right? Where you want to be able to see the whole plan, and I don't. I want to know that there's a next step, and I want to know that the destination is possible, and that's it. And I just assume, unless there's a lot of like cascading dependencies, I just assume that I'll fill in the blanks as I go. And so I don't think too much about the whole path as much as just like the present and the end. Except in a case where I'm not confident that it's achievable, right? And then I want to know for sure, like, or at least like as well as I can to understand what the steps are.
Okay, so you told me earlier that you tried all diets, like, and it sounded like
hyperbolic, but yeah, a lot.
Yeah, like maybe half dozen, or maybe
I was never like a fruitarian. No Steve Jobs.
So tell us.
But sorry, anyway. Tell us what.
Tell us which ones you tried and which ones worked, and which one you found the most helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I tried paleo, keto, calorie counting, low carbs. For me, I think the experience of eating Whole30 was extraordinary. Like it's this like very strict version of paleo. And I think that I've never felt better in my body and my mind as I did when I was eating that way. But it's also, incredibly impractical to do that and still kind of exist in a society and have friends and go places and travel and, do these types of things, because there's just so many restrictions that you have, and it gets really annoying having to call a restaurant and ask what kind of, oil they cook with and things like that. So, as you know, yeah. So I think that just from like a food as fuel perspective, Whole30, and then, to like a lesser extent, paleo, as long as you're fairly strict about it, have been the most successful for me. But I found keto to be really interesting, and there were long periods of time where I couldn't put in all the effort to maintaining like a strict regimen. And so I would just do calorie counting or low carbs. And, I think that worked for me here and there. And now that I'm kind of more in maintenance mode, I think that tends to be what I do more often than not too. So
what about fasting or intermittent fasting? You tried that?
I think that I would love to try it. But not eating is like very antithetical to my mode of existence, which is to eat all the time. So I don't know if it's like authentic to myself. But I read a little bit about the potential health benefits, and I feel like it's definitely going to be something that I'm going to experiment with. I think I have a hard time seeing myself stick to it, as much as I know me.
I got a challenge for all of us. Hopefully we get through a number of these topics today, and I'd like to see if we are up for challenging ourselves to do one of them in the next 30 days. So for example, a 48 or 72 hour fast, peptides, stem cell therapy, infrared lasers, you name it. There's a whole list of what we got here. Anyone
Awesome.
up for that?
I've done several of those in the last week, so I've already got a jump start.
Let's talk about
Are we each picking one? Sorry, because you can do fasting.
Yeah, I've been meaning to fast. 72
Sorry,
hours.
that's a long time.
72
What was that,
hours
Ron?
is,
I
Oh,
was going to
sorry.
say, I would love to just hear more about each of those, like the, particularly the infrared stuff, because, you'd mentioned before you've done some of those and there's some devices and stuff. Well, what's the underlying, theory of infrared or near infrared light?
Sure. I know, Tony, you have some experience with this also, right?
well, yeah,
Or
I do.
do you want to kick it out? Or I can also. I don't care.
Why don't you go ahead and start, and I'll jump in with
Okay, got
the
it.
saunas.
So the sauna that Tony's talking about is far infrared. I have much less experience with that. This device is a near infrared device, and so there's basically on this 6 1-watt LEDs, which are relatively high power for LEDs, and it just emits light that, when applied towards different parts of the body, effectively stimulate cellular movement, right? And so this sort of that sort of mechanism can be used for all sorts of purposes. So it can be used for like joint regeneration. It can be used to stimulate brain functions or cognitive functions. So, for example, like I use this every day on my frontal cortex because I have pretty severe ADHD, and over time, this has actually helped improve my ability to focus. And it's something that's actually like measurable. It can help with nerve regeneration. It can help reduce inflammation. And a lot of these things are like actually documented, but there aren't a lot of products yet that use these sorts of technologies, especially not at like a consumer level. I think though that we're seeing more and more this trend towards like wanting non-invasive solutions to all sorts of physical and psychological things that people experience. And so I do expect that we'll see kind of like an uptick in these sorts of solutions. And to me, like this already has had a pretty extraordinary impact on like my day-to-day life, because both on like the mental side and the physical side. And this is version 1. I can't even imagine what 20 years from now is going to look like. So
Interesting. And what about you, Tony, working with infrared?
My infrared experience is with an infrared sauna, clear light infrared sauna. I've had a lot of food sensitivity issues for a number of years, which you guys are familiar with. By the way, I just bought my first 6-pack of beers in about 7 years. I think I'm going to try it tomorrow because I reintroduced a different food today. I'll see how that goes. Tomorrow, I'm going to have my first beer in 7 years, and I'll let you know how that goes. I used to be a huge beer drinker, and then, for the past many years, it's only been wine and tequila. Anyways, I found out that just by trial and error, that sweating, detoxification really helped me. I have this autoimmune response to food that caused a lot of inflammation, and it caused inflammation through a cortisol response. So my body would start reacting to certain foods as if it were a toxin or an enemy, and it created this inflammatory response. And so what that looked like is in the middle of the night, I'd wake up like wide awake and I'd start sweating, right? And I'd sweat so much the sheets would get wet. After, unfortunately, many years of this, I finally got the bright idea. I was like, wait a second, what if I help my body out? And so by sweating more. So I went to a sauna, infrared sauna, and I was like, wow, I think I actually do feel better. Went back a few days later, signed up for a monthly program, tried it out for a month, and I was like, yep, I'm definitely getting better. And so I bought one, and it's now in my garage. And I've been using that for about 1 year in that sauna twice a day for at least 20 minutes. And I have steadily improved my health. I've lost all the inflammation in my body. I had a lot of swelling in my lower abdomen. So my belt was 1.5 inches bigger. Like I had to wear a bigger belt. All that decreased. The muscle came back. All the fat started going away again. So for me, it was a detoxification process through infrared saunas. And my infrared sauna says that it is full spectrum. So it uses near, mid, and far infrared. I don't know what it is. Yeah.
I wonder how different that is from, the Nordic people in general are huge sauna fans, right? And and there's been some studies that those have a lot of health benefits along the way. I guess the Russians and that part of the world too are pretty big in it. I have a dry sauna myself, but I don't use it as much. You guys are starting to make me think I should. I wonder if a lot of heat is basically infrared, but I wonder what the difference is between just a warm sauna or actually using the infrared LEDs. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, just from an experiential basis, I know I sweat more in the infrared sauna at a lower temperature than I do in a traditional sauna. So I think I end up sweating more because I can hang out in there longer. So I usually, I'm in there at about between 140 and 148 degrees. Above 148, it just starts getting really uncomfortable, and you get that like, I gotta get the fuck out of here sense, and you have to step out and come back in.
I think it's called roasting.
Or cooking. Cooking, I think. Yeah. Cooking a human. Whereas, traditional...
Cooking with Tony.
Yeah, cooking, Tony.
Cooking.
Well, I think traditional saunas are like above 150, 160. Some go all the way up to 170 degrees.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you can only, I mean, I don't know how long most people, but I can hang out in there for like 15 minutes and I'm just like, I got to get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah. Interesting. And Steve, for that device you have, is it does it give off heat with the near infrared, or so that's the near infrared doesn't do heat, I guess.
So this device in particular doesn't emit heat. The device itself gets hot because just the electronics of the device and the amount of power that's flowing through it gets heat. But it says the mechanism isn't about the emission of heat or the reception of heat. You do feel it. Actually, this is actually an interesting innovation because it's the first one of these higher powered LED devices that if you leave it in one spot, it won't burn you just by cooking you, which is kind of cool. And this will also penetrate, a fair amount through the skin, whereas a lot of the types of light therapy products or even infrared products, like they don't have enough power density to even penetrate the first couple of millimeters of skin. So
got it.
This is really exciting for me.
Got it. That's cool stuff. And then, Tony, what other tech was on the list that we've all been talking about?
Nootropics, psychotropics, microdosing, or just plain psychedelics.
Oh, yeah. So what about those? Steve, you have experience with psychedelics or microdosing? Being there in California?
I've never done any microdosing.
Got it.
You've done megadosing.
I've done a whole range of dosing besides microdosing.
Got it.
And I think that as a person, psychedelics have had a pretty profound impact on me and probably changed the trajectory of who I am in what I feel like is a very positive way. I don't know how much detail you want to get into, but I think I've had some experiences with most of the big ones, and I think that they've helped me, shed baggage from my history, work through emotional issues, improve my ability to relate or empathize with other people. And I also like things that kind of change the way the brain works temporarily, because it creates this kind of reference point for what a different way of experiencing the world is. And I think that gives you this this kind of like interesting perspective on what it means to be a human, but also in cases where you're trying to like optimize your own experience, it gives you kind of a reference point that you can use to practice towards, right? So a good example of that would be, this idea of being present, which is something that a lot of people do like meditation and mindfulness for. I think I didn't know what being very, very present felt like until I did psychedelics, right? And I think after that, I can say, oh, well, that's what that is that I'm working for. Great. Now I can know as I'm walking around throughout the day if I'm there or not. And if not, what are the things I can do to help, improve my ability to get to those same sorts of places, like mentally and emotionally, when I'm in a not altered state, right? Plus, fun. So.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. There's, and it's an interesting topic because I think a lot of people, and it kind of depends on where you live, like psychedelics or something, it seems like every California kitchen might have, but if you leave California, you might end up in places where they're super scary to people. And I was raised, to believe they were super scary, along the way, but Michael Pollan, famous food author, probably the most important influencer with the farm to table movement and a lot of the, eat healthier movement that we've seen in the last 10 years, 12 years, wrote Omnivore's Dilemma and even wrote a kid version of that book. And it's a great book. And last year, I think, or maybe late the year before, he released How to Change Your Mind. And this is a, super best-selling New York Times kind of guy, author who, and writes a science writer for big publications, decided to go on this journey. And, after seeing there's, some pretty good peer-reviewed scientific articles, there's clinical trials, and a whole ton of anecdotal evidence, like you just gave, that psychedelics are a legit thing. And I picked up the book because my older daughter, who's getting ready to be 13, a couple of years ago, we were in Hawaii and she broke her arm just body surfing and just weird freak accident. And and we went to the Hawaii emergency room to set it. It was actually a really bad break on the shoulder. She eventually ended up with a pin in her arm to fix it. But the prior to this injury, she was dealing with a lot of depression for a kid who was like 9 years old, and having a really rough time in school. And it's kind of the really smart kid that tends to alienate the average kids at school and even her teachers. And it was really bad. And we'd even gotten to the point where we had her on Prozac for a period of time to see if that would help. And it didn't help at all. It actually tended to make things worse for her in particular. But I'd been reading, and the wife, we'd been reading about these psychedelics and even things like ketamine, and some of the tranquilizers that there's been some studies that could have a lot of help with depression and some other mental state issues. And when I took her to the emergency room, because it was Maui and there'd already been a lot of injuries that weekend and it was a Sunday, they were actually out of the normal tranquilizers they use for kids. And so they had to give her ketamine. And this was a pretty stressful day for me. I'm standing in the emergency room with her, and I hear the doctor's like, I forget what he asked for, and she's like, and I remember we used the last of that, and he's like, oh, well, what do we got? And then she started listing off all these drugs, and he's like, okay, let's just do the ketamine. And he looks at me and he's like, what's her weight? And I'm like, I don't know, 110 pounds or something, something. And he's like, okay, we'll go with it. We'll go with that. Right. Like, it's pretty stressful because I'm like, you're giving her a tranquilizer just based on, my guess, but whatever. And so they shot her up with ketamine and she went into what I now know is described as a K-hole where her pupils, her pupils, get super large, and she was just staring into space. Right. But still obviously conscious, but totally unplugged. And the guy is wailing on her broken arm, trying to set it, and actually has another guy wailing on it with her. Like, and it looks like they're trying to rip her arm off. Like, it's scaring the hell out of me as the dad, but she's feeling none of this. Like, this ketamine's doing this amazing thing. And she comes out of it, and they actually failed setting her arm. And we had to wait till we get back to Utah and an orthopedic surgeon to fix it. But after that ketamine dosage, which me and the wife are thinking about how do we get her ketamine along the way, safe way to figure it out, changed her life. Like it was really, really interesting. Like she's a totally different person.
Just from that one time.
From that one dose 2 years ago. And maybe, a scientist would say, well, maybe it was the experience of going through a broken arm, or maybe some hormonal changes. She's gotten a little older, but no kidding. Like from, the week or two after she got off the painkillers and everything else that, she went through, she got the surgery on her shoulder. And I think she got one more dose of some kind of tranquilizer, obviously when they put the pen in as well. So, but I wasn't in the room at that point, so I don't know what they gave her. Like she came out with a whole different mindset and outlook on life. Like, and that's, what really convinced me to like, shit, I want to try psychedelics now, or some of these other treatments. And I don't deal with depression, I think much, but I think, this concept of, like you just mentioned, getting more present, opening your mind, some of the other things you read about making people more creative and other things. These are really compelling things that I think would be super interesting to explore more.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. I think that a lot of what we think is okay is based off of, a lot of what we think is okay to do as a society is based off of, restricting things that we don't understand, or restricting our access to things that we don't understand. And so I think this kind of, narrative around these things being terrible things was kind of written by people who didn't understand them, and perpetuated by people who didn't know better. And in doing so, I think we've kind of like we turned off the trajectory of knowledge for decades about the potential therapeutic benefits of these things as tools, right?
Yeah.
And I think that now it's becoming a part of the mainstream conversation. There are, cities that are decriminalizing psilocybin. There are countries that are decriminalizing all drugs, like Portugal. And I think these things are at least going to allow us to do more scientific research in a controlled environment that will give us a greater confidence in the effect of these things, which I think ultimately will lead to their refinement as a tool, so that they can be administered and managed by professionals, and you can have a pipeline that's controlled and regulated and taxed and safe. And so I think that if you look far enough out, then in my mind there's going to be no doubt that the use of psychedelics will be a lot more mainstream and a lot safer than it is today. I don't know when that's going to be, but I think that's a better future for humanity, personally.
Yeah.
In your experience,
and that's awesome, by the way. But sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, along the lines of the story that Ron just told us, can you think of one big transformative experience through your use of psychedelics that you want to share?
Yeah, sure. I'll share my, like, just a brief summary of my first DMT breakthrough. I think that DMT was always something that was really fascinating to me, and like the idea of your relationship to yourself, kind of like being torn apart, is really interesting. And so I think the first time I had a DMT experience where you're going through this like terrifying, explosive, fast-paced journey that you can't even begin to comprehend or wrap your head around, and then you wake up and you don't quite remember like who you are, how you got there yet, and this process of like almost like rebuilding your index of self, and how little of my baggage I carried with me from the beginning of that trip to when I kind of came back out of it, and like the way that I felt and experienced the world when I came back out. So that was what I was referencing when I was talking about being more present. I've never felt as present ever as the brief period of time when you come back from a DMT trip. And I think that, like, to me, that experience has become aspirational for me, right? And like, that's not something I want to do all the time, but it does make me a lot more motivated to figure out how to shut off the things that I don't need in the moment to moment experience of being alive, and be more attentive to the things that are right in front of me. And I think that, like, the net effect of that is like an improvement in psychological well-being and reduction of stress and all sorts of other things that are very positive. So yeah, I think I would probably credit that with that.
DMT, yeah.
With B. Yeah, 100%. And that is like, it's not that fun. Like, it's for sure, in my experience, and from my perspective anyway, it's for sure something that you use as a tool and something to be taken very, very seriously, because it's intense.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And for our future listeners, it's not like we're advocating go out and do a lot of self experimentation here. These are things that there is a lot of studies written and clinical documentation to guide and along the way, and you should dive in and understand those things. And there's risks to these things too. But and Steve, I know him personally. He has a very scientific approach to this stuff in the mix, and is very careful with sourcing and approach as well in the mix. So, but
safety precautions too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also want to add, like, as an individual, I have kind of an extraordinary tolerance for risk. Like, I wouldn't recommend most people do these things unless they feel very safe and are well educated and and are comfortable with what they're doing. I don't think anyone should push themselves, or force themselves to do something that they're not comfortable with, or something that creates like an unnecessary risk. So, and in a lot of ways, there are ways to experience some of these things in safe and legal ways, around the world. And so if someone, wants to pursue them in that sort of avenue, like, you can go to where countries where it's legal to consume psilocybin, and you can have an experience, or where even like psilocybin assisted psychotherapy is, kind of like a treatment for things like depression that's being experimented with. And I think that, like, those types of environments with practitioners and regulation are, they're great.
Yeah, I think there's also clinical studies. There's a lot more. I would say almost every week in the mainstream press, there is an article about psychedelics, especially mushrooms in particular, and and in some states, like I think in Utah, they grow wild, right? And so in Utah, if I remember correctly, don't rest a legal opinion on this. I'm not a lawyer, but I think last time I looked at it, they're actually legal to possess. They're just not legal to sell. And because literally, like where I live, they could be growing in my front yard. And so
Is that because you planted them there?
No, because Steve was at my house. No,
never been to Ron's house.
They just fell out of his pocket.
Look, mushrooms are interesting little creatures. They have all kinds of good and bad things in them along the way. It's the thing that scared me the most about even trying mushrooms, which I haven't yet. But
mushroom party.
But it's on the list. It's just like, how does the guy or lady who put those mushrooms together know they're not giving me a poisonous mushroom? And so I'm always paranoid about the source.
or like thinking it a step further, it's for sure poisonous. And you just want the right kind of poisonous. Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Steve and I experimented on a batch of mushrooms. Halfway through it, we were like, oh, fuck, these are really heavy mushrooms. Like, we were into like really deep conversations, and we were actually looking forward to just like going to listen to some cool music, and we were just expounding on the existential topics instead. So yeah, there are differences.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting. And then we were talking on the list also, I think, was stem cells. Steve, you've also have done some stem cell therapy, right?
Love them. I love them. I've had great experiences with stem cells, and actually, like taking a step further, are you familiar with exosomes?
I'm not. No.
Okay, so stem cells, like, I mean, I guess you obviously have an understanding of like roughly what they are, like, but the way that research was done basically to understand the way that stem cells work, like the mechanism of action. It turns out that cells communicate with each other through this method called an exosome, and it's almost like a letter, and inside the letter is kind of instructions on how to repair yourself, if you will. And so they've kind of figured out that you can not have the live cell and you can only have the exosome, which is the instructions, and it still has the same effect because the cells in your body are able to kind of absorb them. And so doing that, they're able to kind of like create production pipeline that's like a lot more predictable than, for example, like drawing your own blood and taking stem cells out of those. And so the therapeutic benefit of a particular procedure is going to be able to be more controlled and more consistent over time as like these types of technologies begin to take off. My experiences have been pretty varied. So I've gotten injections in my wrist, my back, my knee twice. And then I've gotten infusions of exosomes. And I think that all of those were for different purposes. And I found them all to be very effective. Like, I think that 7 or 8 years ago, my knee was kind of on the brink of needing surgery. And now for the most part, like it's a minor injury and I don't really think about it too much. And I'll probably need kind of periodic treatments every, 5 to 10 years on it, or to figure out what about the way that I hold my body injures my left knee every few years. But I think that like these types of technologies are pretty extraordinary because you can get an injection and all of a sudden like pain that you've had for years goes away in 3 months or 6 months as you go about your life.
And are these your own stem cells that they're injecting back in your body, or is this like something they buy off the shelf and you pick the rock stem cells and you put those in your knee? Like, how does that work?
I want the rock stem cells. Actually, probably not. I think you want to go the other way. You want So I've done both. I've done stem cells that were harvested from my own fat, and I've done stem cells and I've done exosomes that were originally from embryonic tissue, and then I've done a PRP. And so, a range of things. And I think that all of them have been effective for me to varying degrees. I would say that the one that I personally feel like is kind of been the most effective have been exosome treatments. But, I think that's like why they're on the cutting edge a little bit. But
yeah, it's interesting. I have a neighbor, I was telling Tony the story, but he's orthopedic surgeon and moved into stem cell therapy. We were having dinner with him, I don't know, last year, and he'd mentioned that the FDA and I don't know if it was just the type of stem cell therapy he was doing, but he was doing knee injections, and he was saying that they have the same outcome. Stem cell knee injections have the same outcome as actual knee replacement surgery. And in terms of, there's some decent percentage of people, even when you get your knee replaced, that they're not happy with the knee replacement. There's some kind of complication or ongoing pain, or it doesn't last very long or whatever. And it's not single digits. I think it's, 20% or something like that, surprisingly large number for what it costs. Right. And he developed a stem cell therapy, and he just mentioned it's regulated as homeopathic medicine, not as like knee replacement surgery is. And so, which requires him to use your own stem cells. Like, he can't inject other people's stem cells into your knees yet. And again, this was a couple of years ago, so maybe something's changed. But and he makes most of his money creating the kits actually for other orthopedic surgeons to
Got it.
do it, where it's, you extract some bone marrow or something, or maybe it's, and then spin it in a centrifuge, get the stem cells, re-inject them in the knees. And he mentioned it'd be great if they could use younger people's stem cells. Like, he think it'd be a lot more effective, but they just haven't gotten that through the FDA yet. But it's, and so what was really interesting to me was the, it's basically on an almost unregulated field at the moment, which shows still a ton of promise. Like, a lot of people are doing it. There's been a lot of reported success, and there's Tony and I were talking about a potential guest. There's a Netflix series about gene hacking. Maybe you've seen it too, where guys are trying different things, like trying to get glow in the dark puppies. And there's this Berkeley scientist who's actually just trying to open source, biohacking, directly as well. And it's a pretty fascinating series. I don't remember the name of it.
Unnatural Selection.
Unnatural Selection. Yeah, that was it. And it just shows, like, there's this unregulated kind of space with a lot of smart people operating in it, and more people getting in it every day. And now we have like CRISPR too, right, where it won't be too hard down the road to just edit your own genes probably and inject them back in along the way. And we had the Chinese scientist last year that created the 2 HIV resistant babies that I think China said they put to death, actually, that guy, for violating a lot of norms along the way. But it seems like all this stuff is just on the corner and maybe out of reach of regulation already, as we get there. And, this next 10 years is going to be a crazy ride around this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it's out of reach. I think it's like on the cusp, right? And I think one of the great things about the world that we live in is, like, you have these people who want to push the boundaries, and to push the boundaries, you have to operate in gray areas very often, right? Or sometimes not in gray areas. And, I think often those are the people who are able to develop this, like, perspective on how the world can change, and then everything else catches up. And I think that things like stem cells are a good example of a case where the system of how we treat human beings isn't going to accept them until they've been proven to be as effective in treatment outcomes as things like a knee surgery would be. And that takes time, and it takes people who are willing to invest in research, and it takes people who are willing to pay out of pocket for procedures that might or might not work, so that companies can refine, their treatment protocols. And, I think that's like the world with stem cells that we live in right now, where, you can get it. And for a lot of people, it is effective. And I'm hoping that, like, over time, the cost reduces as you scale up, and they become accessible to more and more people, because I think that these are treatments that, like, everyone should have access to personally. And I think the thing with using your own stem cells, actually, that goes away with exosomes, because it's not live tissue anymore. And so that's how they are allowed to do injections of exosomes that were harvested from fetal tissue. I don't know the exact state of it regulatorily. I don't know at the moment, but because the ones that I got, at the end of last year, they're not allowed to use that product. Like, the FDA has, like, put it on hold, and I don't exactly understand why. So this time I had to use, like, exosomes that were harvested from my own blood instead of from fetal tissue. But I think, like, we're on a path, right?
Yeah. My guess would be the fetal tissue stuff is related to the abortion, conservative, moral issues around some of these things. I feel like there's, you mentioned a lot of good reasons why there's things, held back and coming. I think two others are, we always have these political concerns and moral panics, whether it's about psychedelics or fetal tissue or whatever. And then we have, I think we also have, the reality, the big pharma, if we can't figure out a way for a lot of people to make money on it, it tends to get regulated out of existence also, or somehow hampered, right? And I think that's been the psychedelics' biggest issue. Some early moral panic in the 60s and 70s during the free love movement, combined with like, holy shit, this is a powerful drug that anybody can grow safely at their house. We don't want this has got to get regulated. And cannabis went through this and is still going through it, right? In the mix and along the way. And also, I think with cannabis, there's even been very strong racial stuff too, right? And kind of drug of choice for white people, alcohol is allowed and regulated through taxes and stuff. But for other populations, drugs that they prefer or have easier access to tend to get regulated and locked down. And it kind of sucks because there's these very promising things out there that you should have a right to try, and there should be a legal safe path where you work with a doctor or a trained therapist to get access to these things, and some kind of informed consent approach to really see what happens. And over time, it looks like we're moving in the right direction regardless, but it feels like there's a lot of harm out there through the regulatory environment. As much as, and I'm not saying, the regulatory environment does also prevent harm. There's a lot of benefit to some of this stuff too, but overall, it's interesting, and we'll just have to see where it goes. Tony, have you done any stem cell stuff?
No, I've ran out of reasons to. I haven't had a surgery in 6 years. I haven't had a major injury in like 6 years. So I've been looking for something. I just don't know where to put it.
Got it.
So I'm not a good candidate for.
You could try an exosome infusion. Well, I guess like if you don't carry a lot of bodily inflammation, I don't know if it would do a lot for you, but.
Yeah, I think, maybe that's where we kind of wrap this up for today. I think, I know in the next week or so, I'm going to be experimenting with peptides, specifically BPC 157. So that has a lot of purported benefits. The one I'm looking for is gut healing. So, but it comes with a lot of other, a lot of benefits around muscular growth, connective tissue healing, which I currently don't have. We'll see how that goes. So that's what I'm picking. I'm doing peptides.
How do you take peptides? Is it an
I'm
IV?
taking them as a capsule.
Capsules. Got it.
Yep.
So they survive the gut.
Yeah.
Nice.
Supposedly.
Interesting. Have you tried peptides, Steve?
At Tony's recommendation, I picked some up, but I think that, I don't know, mine are not as good as I have regular off the shelf pedestrian peptides. I think he has
like a GNC
from Amazon.
Amazon.
I think Tony has, high tech special fancy people peptides. So I'm gonna wait to see what his experience is like, and maybe I'll switch. But I just started taking them a couple days ago because I'm also going through some gut issues, and I'm hoping, like, fingers crossed.
So gut issues, maybe we didn't mention this, but maybe you want to try this. Golden poop, fecal matter transplants.
Yeah, fecal matter transplants. Those are super interesting as well.
Are you inviting someone to try them?
I was suggesting that for you.
For discussion. I would consider that at the discretion of my healthcare professionals.
So now we have to bring the healthcare professional in when it's fecal matter.
Well, hold on.
I mean, if it's a crazy mushroom, I got it figured out. But,
yeah.
Okay, but I guess my question is, how do you do like an at-home fecal transplant?
Oh, actually, so I can. I haven't done it. I haven't done it, but this was, Tony and I've talked about it a few times. Like, I feel like there's a startup in here, and someone's going to make a lot of money on fecal matter transplants. But they're starting to come into vogue too, with a lot of science supporting them. There was a multi-page New York Times article a few years ago, and there was one a couple years before that. But both for like weight loss, there's this theory that the gut has a big impact on our body and also on mental state as well. And we just don't understand it, the complex gut biomes. And you have this big probiotic push that we see, it's been heavily commercialized now. And I've had some success with probiotics, actually.
Same.
So I'm a fan of certain ones, and but the fecal matter transplant is super interesting because there have been these cases where either because of severe irritable bowel syndrome or C. diff or whatever, people just really suffering and in their life really at risk. And the last option was, they ran into a doctor who's finally like, hey, let's try a fecal matter transplant, and they would find someone healthy
Like the Rock.
Yeah, like the Rock or somebody, and often a relative who like I think one of the stories in the New York Times were two sisters. One was morbidly obese for a long part of her life because of irritable bowel syndrome and some other problems. She had a younger sister who was very fit, and they performed a fecal matter transplant, and not only did it seem to address the C. diff or whatever long-standing infection she had in her gut, she rapidly lost weight and started looking more like her sister. And there's been some other stories. There's been the reverse of that also. Like, you can mess yourself up. I've read a story where the reverse happened, where an overweight sister did a fecal matter transplant with a skinny sister, and the skinny sister gained a lot of weight, right? Because the gut bacteria may have something to do with.
Wait a second. They weren't.
The overweight sister gave her.
Yeah,
gut
because
biome to the skinny sister.
the overweight sister wasn't suffering from irritable bowel syndrome. The skinnier sister was, and they were trying to cure the irritable bowel syndrome, but then they realized they actually transferred the weight problem as well with the bacteria.
Right. And so these weren't home tests, were they?
This was medical. These were doctors. But I do think there's a startup, especially in the unregulated space, and especially in a place like Beverly Hills or whatever, where you could probably go and harvest gut bacteria from famous fit people or from Himalayan monks that have lived 100 years or 80 years or whatever, package it up, put it in some kind of kit where you get antibiotics prescribed by your doctor to clear your gut, and then you put a suppository in or take a golden poop pill, as Tony calls it, and maybe for $1,000 a course, you get Himalayan monk gut biome transferred in the mix, and it feels like these things, and we'll probably see it from Pfizer or from Gilead or one of the big pharma guys, and then we'll see regulation too, where you can't eat other people's poop, which is hilarious because there's a whole course of psychology and a really good Rick and Morty episode actually on that topic, but it feels like this is the gut biome and doing gut biome transplants is definitely a cutting edge science that also has a lot of home hacking and biohacking going on.
Who's down for that?
Can we get the Rock?
I mean, as soon as Ron starts the company, I will try it. I'm fine with that. I have gut problems, so please. Yeah. I mean, let me know when you're open.
Well, so I'm trying to get people to commit here to using something. Ron, you haven't done a lot of these things on this list, although you know deeply about a lot of them.
Yeah, I've been reading and studying them over the years, and some of these are high on my list to want to experiment with. Both stem cell and psychedelics, I think, are very interesting avenues to explore in the mix. And like I said, I'm overweight myself, and that's another great topic. When we talk about losing weight and discipline and stuff, but often I think, because I've tried different ways to lose weight and tried to be disciplined and pretty goal driven about it, and it failed over the years and for all kinds of reasons. But I feel like if there's a silver bullet, it's probably in this gut biome transplant issue, whether it's through fecal matter or through some other set of, once they understand all the proper dozens or hundreds of dozens of bacteria that lives in your gut and the right proportion of them and how to reset your system. Because, as a kid, I grew up in the South and in the military, and antibiotics in the 70s were handled like candy. Like I probably had them 2 or 3 times a year sometimes. And I've probably, and I've also suffered from allergies and other issues that lead to sinus infections or even walking pneumonia sometimes. So there's a rare year in my life where I'm not taking some kind of antibiotic. And we know, we give antibiotics to cattle and to pigs to gain weight. They're specifically just to help them gain weight. And so we know antibiotics increase the fat content of pork and beef. And so they probably have some kind of similar effect on humans, though we may not fully understand what that effect is in the mix. And so if you've been someone like me where you've been through a lot of antibiotics, there may be a cure of some kind of gut biome transfer or transplant in the mix. And that's why I've been deep into that topic. And I think we're close. Like I think we're a few years, there's all kinds of clinical trials going on. There's a lot more doctors, people are more willing to talk about it in the mix. And we may see some interesting treatments come from that. I don't know if I'd recommend doing it on your own.
So your commitment is to try that?
No.
Right, Tony? Or no?
Look, if we weren't in the quarantine situation, you might be able to talk me into trying psychedelics with you guys in California when I'm next out there. But I think, I don't know. I think we, maybe these peptides might be a thing too. Let's see if I can grab some.
I mean, I'm already on the peptides. I feel like I would love to commit to, and I did stem cells last week. So if you want, I can report back in a month to see how those things are treating me. But I think the number of things that I've changed in the last 2 or 3 weeks would make it hard for me to isolate the effect of any one thing. If you're encouraging me, I could probably try some psychedelics in the next month.
No, I don't want to be on the hook for self-medication and encouraging, but yeah, I think maybe the peptides, we should figure this out and see. You guys are doing it. I'm happy to check it out and see what's going on.
Yeah. And I'm happy to talk about the peptides and the exosomes, which I just got a bunch of them. And
dude, fasting's a real easy one. We don't have to get anything. We just
you can go fuck yourself. How about that? I'm just kidding. I should try fasting.
I've tried. I feel so bad when I'm fasting though. Like I just can't make it through it. Like the headaches.
How long have you tried for?
I can't go to sleep hungry. Like I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling. And again, this may be a gut biome issue, that's tied into the brain. But yeah. All
right. Well, exosomes and peptides it is. I'm taking peptides. Steve is taking peptides.
Ron what's my minimum fast duration to try fasting?
Minimum is 48.
Okay. 48. Wow.
Okay.
48. Well, it depends on why you're doing it. What's it? God damn it! What's that called?
To qualify for your experiment criteria. That's why I'm doing it. The 48 hours.
So I'm looking at what's that term for cell wasting?
I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember offhand.
So that is optimized at 72 hours, and it begins at 48.
At 48 hours. Got it.
Yeah. Is it hypertrophy? Is that the term?
I don't recall. No, I don't think so.
And so you're just sipping water, drinking water, or what?
Yeah.
That's it. So just water.
I mean, there's various mitigations, but basically it's just water.
Just water.
Well, I'll ask you more about it, and then I will give it a big maybe.
Okay.
So
all right, guys. Thank you very much for being on and spending the time with us, and thank you everyone listening.
Yeah, right, thanks so much. Good talking to you, Steve. You guys stay safe out there.
Nice to catch up. Likewise.
Yeah.
All right. Take it easy, guys.